Sophie hopped off the school bus, her heart dancing with excitement. The thought of her favorite after-school snack gave her an extra spring in her step. As she pushed the front door open, the comforting aroma of freshly baked cookies greeted her like a warm hug. She dropped her backpack on the floor, quickly unzipped it, and started rummaging through it. "Where is it?" she muttered, tossing aside her pencil case and art supplies. Finally, she found what she was looking for, her brand new sheet of sparkly heart-shaped stickers. Sophie's face lit up as she gently peeled off one of the stickers. "Time to share the love," she declared. She marched straight to the door and placed the first sticker on it. "I love coming home." She danced around the living room, sticking hearts on the cozy couch, the framed family photo on the wall, and her favorite bookshelf. "I love this, and this, and this," she sang, twirling like a ballerina. Her older brother, Max, walked in, munching on an apple. He stopped mid-bite, staring at the stickers scattered everywhere. What are you doing, Sophie?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm spreading love," Sophie beamed, placing another sticker on the lamp. "My teacher said we should celebrate the things we love, so I'm decorating everything that makes me happy." Max smirked. "Everything? That's a bit much, don't you think? You can't possibly love a lamp or a chair." Sophie frowned, her hands on her hips. "Of course I can. Love isn't just for people, you know." Max shrugged and walked off, muttering, "Little sisters are so weird." Sophie ignored him and skipped to the kitchen, where her mum was pulling a tray of cookies from the oven. The sight of the gooey chocolate chips made Sophie's heart swell. "Mum, look at all the love I'm spreading," Sophie said, showing off her half-empty sticker sheet. Her mum chuckled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. But what does love mean to you?" Sophie paused, thinking carefully. "Love is when you share your favorite toys, or when someone makes you laugh when you're sad. It's that warm, happy feeling inside." Her mom smiled. "That's a beautiful way to put it, Sophie." Sophie grabbed a warm cookie, savouring the melty chocolate. "I love cookies too," she giggled. As the afternoon wore on, Sophie continued her mission, placing heart stickers on her fluffy blanket, her art supplies, and even the family dog Charlie, who wagged his tail in approval. Later, Sophie heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find her grandmother, Nana Grace. Sophie's face lit up as she hugged her tightly, sticking a heart on Nana's scarf. "What's this, my darling?" Nana Grace asked, touching the sticker. "It's my way of showing love," Sophie explained. Sophie stared out the window at the relentless rain. She sighed heavily, her forehead resting on the glass. "This is so boring," she muttered. Beside her, their shaggy dog, Benny, let out a low whine. His wagging tail had stilled, and his longing eyes mirrored Sophie's disappointment. "Why don't you play something inside?" her mum suggested gently from the couch, knitting a scarf. Sophie barely registered her mum's words. Her mind was already racing with ideas for an adventure. "Come on, Benny," she called, bounding toward her brother Leo's room. Sophie passed her own room and paused. Inside, her latest project sat proudly on her desk, a colourful diorama she had spent hours crafting for school. "Wow, Benny, it looks like a tiny world," Sophie exclaimed. The diorama depicted a bustling fairground, complete with popsicle stick rides, painted figurines and miniature tents. Benny barked excitedly, his nose twitching at the new discovery. Sophie couldn't resist. She picked up a tiny figure and waved it playfully in front of Benny. "Want to play fetch?" Benny's tail thumped against the floor as he jumped to his paws. With a giggle, Sophie tossed the figurine, and Benny darted after it, skidding across the floor. One by one, the carefully crafted figures became part of their impromptu game. Laughter filled the room as they played. But when the fun ended, the diorama was in shambles. Miniature tents toppled, popsicle sticks snapped, and painted figures scratched. Later, Leo wandered into Sophie's room. He froze at the sight of the chaos. His jaw dropped. Oh, he murmured, stepping backward. It wasn't long before Sophie returned. The moment her eyes landed on the destroyed diorama, her heart sank. "No," she whispered, rushing to the desk. She carefully picked up the broken pieces, tears welling in her eyes. "I worked so hard on this." Her fingers trembled as she tried to piece the project back together, but the damage was too great. Meanwhile, Leo and Benny had moved on to new adventures. In their parents' bedroom, Leo's eyes gleamed at the sight of neatly folded blankets. "Look, Benny, let's make a fort," Benny barked in agreement. In no time, the room transformed into a wonderland. Blankets draped over chairs and pillows stacked high created a maze of tunnels and towers. Twinkling fairy lights added a magical glow. Leo and Benny played a game of hide-and-seek inside the fort, their laughter echoing through the house. But as they crawled out of the fort, their fun was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. "It's Mom," Leo whispered. Panicking, Leo and Benny bolted out the back door, leaving the fort and the mess behind. When Mom entered the bedroom, she gasped. Blankets were scattered everywhere and pillows lay in disarray. She sighed deeply. Mom's voice echoed through the house. "Leo, Sophie, come here now." Leo and Benny, who had been playing in the garden, tiptoed back inside. Muddy paw prints and footprints trailed behind them, marking the freshly cleaned floor. As they approached, Sophie joined them, her diorama pieces clutched tightly in her hands. "Sophie, what happened?" Mom asked, noticing her tear-streaked face. Leo's stomach dropped as Sophie explained the destruction of her project. Mom turned to Leo with a stern expression. "Leo, was this your doing?" Leo hesitated but finally nodded. "I didn't mean to break it. I was just playing with Benny." Sophie sniffled, her lower lip trembling. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll help you fix it. I promise with Mom's guidance." Leo and Sophie worked side by side to repair the diorama. While Sophie repainted the figures, Leo glued the broken pieces back together. Benny even pitched in, carrying soft cloths to Mom as she cleaned up the muddy footprints. When the diorama was finally restored, Sophie managed a small smile. "It's not the same, but it's still special." Leo nodded. "I'll be more careful next time. I'm really sorry, Sophie." Sophie hesitated before handing him one of the tiny figures. "Here, you can have this one." Leo's eyes widened. "Really?" Sophie nodded. "Just don't let Benny chew it." The siblings laughed, and for the first time that day, the tension melted away. That evening, as the family sat together for dinner, Leo glanced at Sophie. "Thanks for forgiving me," he said sincerely. Sophie smiled. "Just remember to ask next time." Mom chimed in. "We all make mistakes, but what's important is learning from them." Leo nodded. "I'll remember that, Mom." The family shared a laugh, and the warmth of forgiveness filled the room. And from that day on, Leo made sure to respect others' belongings, knowing that a little care could go a long way. Once Benny was settled on a soft cushion in the living room, Dad left to finish his chores. Leo crouched next to his best friend, his brow furrowed in thought. Benny's ears drooped and his eyes looked sad. Leo couldn't stand seeing his buddy in pain. "I'll cheer you up, Benny, you'll see," Leo said, determination lighting up his face. First, he gathered Benny's favorite treats and arranged them in a little feast by the window where the sunlight streamed in. "Look, Benny, your own special spot," Leo announced proudly. Benny wagged his tail slightly, his eyes brightening for a moment, but when he tried to move onto the mat, he hesitated. "Oh, I didn't think about that," Leo exclaimed. "It's too hard for you to sit on the floor." Leo gently carried Benny back to his cushion, stroking his fur. "Don't worry, Benny. I'll think of something else." Next, Leo rounded up all of Benny's squeaky toys. He created a fun little display and announced, "Benny, it's a toy parade, just for you." Benny perked up at the sight and let out a soft bark. But when he tried to join in the fun, his paw throbbed and he winced. Benny rested his head on the cushion, his tail barely wagging. Leo frowned. That didn't work either." Determined, Leo picked up the toys, remembering how hard Mom worked to keep the house tidy. He wasn't going to make a mess. Once the toys were back in their basket, Leo grabbed his guitar. "Let's have a sing-along, Benny," he said, strumming a cheerful tune. Benny's ears twitched and he let out a soft howl, trying to join in. But when he shifted too much, his injured paw caused him to stumble. "Oh no, Benny, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make it worse," Leo said, his voice heavy with regret. As quickly as she could, little Sophie joined the line for the bus. Right behind her was her best friend, Jacqueline. Today was the first time Jacqueline was coming over to Sophie's house. "I can't wait to see your place," Jacqueline said, her voice full of excitement. "Me neither," Sophie exclaimed. "I've got so much planned for us." Finally, the girls reached Sophie's house. As they approached the front door, Sophie turned to Jacqueline with a whisper of excitement. "Are you ready, Jacqueline?" Jacqueline nodded eagerly. "So ready!" Sophie pushed the door open and the two friends stepped inside. The cozy aroma of freshly baked cookies greeted them, their faces lit up with delight. "Plan number 1, Jacqueline, the great cookie party," Sophie announced dramatically. The girls giggled as they headed to the kitchen, but just as they reached for the tray of cookies, it slipped from the counter. The tray hit the floor and the cookies scattered everywhere. Sophie froze in shock while Jacqueline gasped. Before they could process what had happened, Benny, Sophie's mischievous dog, darted into the kitchen. His nose led him straight to the fallen cookies. "No, Benny!" Sophie cried, but it was too late. Benny had already begun devouring the sugary treats. Sophie's shoulders slumped and her eyes filled with tears. "Oh no, Jacqueline! Those cookies were supposed to be the best part of our day." Jacqueline patted Benny on the head, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "Well, Benny seems to think they're amazing." Sophie let out a small laugh despite herself. "I guess he does. But still, what are we going to do now?" Determined to save the day, Sophie led Jacqueline into the backyard. There they found Sophie's grandmother, Nana, waiting with an assortment of clay and paints. "Nana's going to teach us how to paint pottery," Sophie said, her excitement returning. Jacqueline's eyes sparkled. "That sounds amazing." The girls quickly got to work. They dipped their brushes into vibrant colours, creating swirls and patterns on the clay pieces. "Plan number 2, enchanted pottery art," Sophie declared, laughing as Jacqueline added tiny stars to her design. "You girls are doing wonderful work," Nana said, admiring their creativity. But their fun was interrupted by Luna, Sophie's curious cat. Luna had been watching the girls from the corner of the table. Unable to resist the colourful paints, she swished her tail and sent a jar of paint tumbling over. The paint splattered everywhere, covering the girls' hands, clothes, and freshly painted pottery. "Luna!" Jacqueline exclaimed, her mouth agape. "Look what you've done!" Sophie stared at the ruined pottery, her excitement dimming. "Our art, it's ruined," she said with a heavy sigh. Jacqueline gave Sophie a playful nudge. "Maybe Luna wanted to be an artist too." Sophie chuckled softly. "Yeah, maybe." She took a deep breath and smiled. "Don't worry, Jacqueline. I have another idea." The girls rushed to the living room. Sophie grabbed the remote and grinned. "Plan number 3, movie time." She pressed play, but nothing happened. The screen remained blank. "Oh no!" Sophie groaned. "I think my brother forgot to download the movie." The girls exchanged glances, their disappointment clear, but Sophie refused to give up. "I won't let this ruin our day," Sophie said, determination gleaming in her eyes. "Come on, Jacqueline, let's make our own fun." The girls dived into a flurry of creative activities. They turned socks into silly puppets and put on a hilarious puppet show. They rummaged through Sophie's mom's closet, trying on old hats and striking dramatic poses. Finally, they ran outside to the apple tree where they danced and sang under the fading sunlight. By the end of the day, Sophie and Jacqueline were sprawled on the grass, breathless from laughter. Sophie wiped a happy tear from her cheek. "You know what, Jacqueline? Even though the cookies, the art, and the movie didn't go as planned, today was still amazing." Jacqueline grinned. "That's because we made it fun, together." That night, as Sophie lay in bed, she thought about everything that had happened. She realized that life was full of surprises, both good and bad. But with a little creativity and a lot of hope, she could turn even the toughest moments into something magical. And with that thought, Sophie drifted off to sleep, a smile on her face and a heart full of happiness. In a bustling schoolyard, there existed a magical kingdom of friendship. Its rulers were two inseparable friends, Sophie and Juliet. Sophie always imagined herself as the regal queen, while Juliet loved the idea of being the cherished princess. Together, they ruled their imaginary kingdom with laughter and joy. But one sunny afternoon, things took an unexpected turn. As they played in their pretend kingdom, a disagreement arose. "I should be queen today," Juliet declared confidently, her voice firm. Sophie's playful smile quickly faded. "No way, I'm the queen. I thought of this kingdom first." Juliet's face fell. "That's not fair. I want to be queen too. Can't we share?" Sophie crossed her arms, her cheeks turning red with frustration. "No, There can only be one queen, and it's me." The air between them grew tense. Sophie, blinded by her own stubbornness, declared, "Fine, I don't want to be your friend anymore." Juliet gasped, her eyes welling up with tears. Without another word, she turned and ran away, leaving Sophie standing alone by the swing set. As Sophie swung back and forth on the empty swings, she began to feel the weight of her words. The warmth of their friendship was now replaced by a cold loneliness. Throughout the school day, Sophie couldn't concentrate. The desk she shared with Juliet felt eerily quiet. Sophie wanted to apologize but couldn't summon the courage to face her. Later, during a lesson, Juliet hesitantly asked, "Sophie, do you have an extra pencil? I forgot mine." Without looking at Juliet, Sophie slid a pencil across the desk. "Here," she said robotically, keeping her eyes fixed on her book. Juliet's smile faded as she realized Sophie's coldness hurt more than their fight. That afternoon, as they rode the bus home, they sat on opposite sides of the aisle. Their eyes met briefly, but Sophie quickly looked away. Her heart ached with both regret and longing. The next day, Sophie found herself back at the playground. She sat on the swing, staring at the sandbox where she and Juliet had once shared so many happy moments. She remembered their games of hide and seek, their fairy adventures, and their endless laughter. "I miss her so much," Sophie whispered, her voice heavy with regret. Her heart tugged with both anger and sadness. But deep down, Sophie knew she valued her friendship with Juliet far more than her pride. "I have to fix this," Sophie said to herself, standing up with determination. She spotted Juliet near the sandbox, playing quietly by herself. Taking a deep breath, Sophie walked over. Her heart raced, but she refused to let fear hold her back. "Juliet," Sophie began softly, "I'm really sorry about what I said yesterday. I didn't mean it. You're my best friend and I don't want to lose you." Juliet looked up, her eyes still holding traces of hurt. But slowly, a small smile spread across her face. "I missed you too," Juliet said quietly. Sophie's heart filled with relief. She reached out and hugged Juliet tightly. "From now on, we'll both be queens," Sophie said with a smile. Juliet's eyes lit up, and she nodded eagerly. "That sounds perfect, Sophie." And so the kingdom of friendship was restored. Sophie and Juliet learned that sharing and forgiveness were the true keys to ruling their magical world. Together they laughed, played, and reigned as two queens, their bond stronger than ever. The crown of true friendship, they realized, was not made of gold or jewels, but of understanding, kindness, and the willingness to forgive. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow across the living room. In one corner, young Liam crouched over his toy box, deep in his imaginary world. His toy sheriff, with its slightly chipped cowboy hat, faced off against a gang of mischievous sheep. "This town ain't big enough for the both of us," Liam muttered in his best cowboy voice, moving the sheriff's arm as if to tip his hat. He was completely engrossed in his play when a sharp cry broke through his concentration. "No!" came the sound from across the room. Startled, Liam looked up. His toys clattered to the floor as he turned to see his younger sister, Sophie, sitting amidst a colourful pile of Legos. Her face was scrunched in frustration. "What's wrong, Sophie?" Liam asked, already annoyed at the interruption. Sophie sighed, her lips quivering. "I've been trying to build this tower all day, but it keeps falling over." Liam glanced at her wobbling structure, which collapsed just as she finished speaking. He wanted to go back to his game, but something in Sophie's teary eyes made him pause. "It's okay," he said, picking up a stray Lego brick and handing it to her. "You just need to keep trying. I'm sure you can do it." Sophie bit her lip, unsure if she believed him. Still, she picked up a few more bricks and gave it another go. Liam nodded in encouragement and turned back to his toys. He placed the sheriff on top of a wooden block and prepared for the final showdown with the sheep gang. But before he could continue, their mum walked into the room and sat beside him. "That was really kind of you to encourage Sophie," she said with a warm smile, ruffling Liam's hair. "But sometimes showing kindness means doing more than just saying nice words. Maybe you could help her." Liam frowned. He wanted to play with his toys, not get caught up in Sophie's Lego troubles. But when he looked at his sister again, he noticed the frustration etched on her face. Her tower had collapsed once more, and this time she didn't even complain. She just sat there, defeated, her hands limp at her sides. A wave of guilt washed over Liam. He set his sheriff down and walked over to Sophie. "Okay, let's do this together," he said, sitting cross-legged beside her. Sophie looked up, surprised. "Really?" "Really," Liam said with a small smile. "First, you need a strong base. If the foundation is wobbly, the whole tower will fall." Together, they sorted through the pile of Legos. Liam showed Sophie how to connect the larger pieces first, creating a sturdy base. Slowly but surely, the tower began to take shape. With Liam's guidance, Sophie's confidence grew. She added pieces carefully, her hands steady for the first time all day. Finally, the last brick was placed. Sophie sat back and stared at the towering structure in awe. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice full of pride. She turned to Liam and threw her arms around him. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you." Liam's cheeks turned pink, but he couldn't hide his grin. "You're welcome, Sophie. Sometimes all it takes is a little teamwork." Their mum, who had been watching from the doorway, clapped her hands softly. "I'm so proud of both of you. Kindness and patience go a long way." As Sophie admired her tower, Liam returned to his toys. But now, the sheriff's mission felt different. Instead of facing off against the sheep gang, he tipped his hat and helped them build a home of their own. After all, Liam had learned an important lesson. Kindness can turn any challenge into an opportunity to grow. Together, one Friday afternoon, Sophie skipped home from school, clutching a small container with a surprise inside. "Hurry up, Oliver!" Sophie called out, her voice bubbling with excitement. She wanted to race down the street to their house, but knew she had to cross the road with her brother. She glanced down at the box in her hands, carefully balancing it to avoid any jostling. Sophie had an important responsibility this weekend. As she entered the house, her eyes sparkled with joy. Their cat, Misty, and dog, Buddy, trotted into the hallway. Even Dad looked up from his book with interest. "Guess what, everyone? We have a special guest this weekend," Sophie announced, her excitement filling the room. "What's all the excitement about?" Dad asked, raising an eyebrow. Sophie grinned from ear to ear. "I brought home Ziggy, the class lizard, for the weekend. It's part of our science project. Isn't that awesome?" Just then, Mum walked into the room. "Sophie," she began gently, "taking care of Ziggy might be a bit of a challenge, especially with Misty and Buddy around. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "Don't worry, Mum. I've helped with Misty and Buddy before. I'll be an expert caretaker for Ziggy too," Sophie replied confidently. With her parents' approval, Sophie bounded up the stairs, cradling Ziggy's box. In her room, she placed it on her desk and carefully opened the lid. Ziggy peered out, his tiny eyes scanning his new surroundings. "Get ready, Ziggy. Misty's going to be very curious about you," Sophie whispered, chuckling. Sure enough, Misty hopped onto the desk, her bright eyes fixated on Ziggy. The lizard flicked out his tongue as if to say hello. Meanwhile, Buddy wagged his tail outside Sophie's door, eager to meet the new guest. Sophie carefully fed Ziggy some crackers and set up a mini obstacle course on her desk. She wanted to ensure Ziggy had the best time under her care. "Sophie, there's a call for you!" Mum's voice echoed from downstairs. Sophie's heart fluttered with excitement. "That must be Lily!" she exclaimed. She turned to Ziggy with a wide smile. "I'll be right back, Ziggy. Don't go anywhere." Leaving the door slightly ajar, Sophie hurried downstairs with Mum's tablet in hand for her video call with Lily. Ziggy, curious about his new surroundings, began to explore. Misty, intrigued by the tiny creature, stepped closer to the desk. Suddenly, with a swift leap, Misty pounced. Startled, Ziggy darted off the desk and disappeared under Sophie's bed. Upstairs, Sophie returned mid-conversation with Lily. Spotting the empty desk, her cheerful expression shifted to one of panic. "Lily, Ziggy's gone!" she cried. Lily's face mirrored Sophie's distress. "Oh no, what happened?" Sophie's voice trembled. "I left the lid open and now he's missing." Her cries reached her parents, who rushed upstairs. "What happened?" Dad asked, his tone filled with concern. "Ziggy's gone. What if I never find him?" Sophie sobbed. Mum knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll find him together." With everyone searching, hope began to replace Sophie's panic. Suddenly, Misty emerged from under the bed, her tail held high. In her mouth dangled Ziggy, safe but clearly startled. "Misty, drop him," Sophie pleaded, her voice urgent. Misty obediently released Ziggy into Sophie's waiting hands. "Oh, Ziggy, you're safe," Sophie whispered, relief washing over her. Dad cleared his throat gently. "Sophie, this is a good reminder about responsibility." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "I know, I should have been more careful. My whole class trusted me." Mom gave her an encouraging smile. "What matters is that you've learned from this experience." Sophie looked at Ziggy with determination. "I promise to be more responsible from now on. I'll make sure you're always safe." Dad placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's all we ask, Sophie." Together they secured Ziggy back in his box. Later at dinner, Mum and Dad shared amusing pet stories from their childhood, making Sophie and Oliver laugh. Throughout it all, Sophie kept one eye on Ziggy, a quiet reminder of her newfound responsibility. Sophie dashed through the front door after school, her excitement palpable, and found her parents in the kitchen. She plopped a journal onto the kitchen table with a triumphant grin. "What's this?" her dad asked, setting aside his paperwork to give Sophie his full attention. "This," Sophie declared with a flourish, "is a gratitude journal. My teacher gave it to me at school today." Her father's brow arched with curiosity. "Gratitude? What does that mean?" Sophie grabbed a chocolate chip cookie from the jar nearby, took a thoughtful bite, and then replied, "Gratitude is about being thankful for all the good things in our lives." Her teacher's words echoed in her mind as she explained. "And how does the journal fit into this?" her mum asked, intrigued. "Each day I'll write down at least 3 things I'm thankful for," Sophie explained, drumming her fingers on the journal's cover. "It's like a diary for happy thoughts." Later, Sophie darted up to her room, clutching her journal. She rummaged through her desk to find her favorite glittery purple pen. Flipping open the journal, she thought carefully about her first entry. "I'm grateful for the best parents in the world," she wrote with a big smile. Next, her eyes landed on a photo of her and her older brother Liam, laughing on a beach vacation. "I'm thankful for Liam, even though he teases me sometimes," she added, giggling at the memory. As she finished writing, her golden retriever, Max, bounded into the room, tail wagging furiously. He leapt onto her lap, licking her face in exuberant affection. Okay, I haven't forgotten you, Max," Sophie laughed, scratching behind his ears. "I'm thankful for you too." Feeling accomplished, Sophie set her journal aside and joined her family for dinner. To her delight, Grandma had come over for a surprise visit. "Grandma!" Sophie squealed, running to give her a big hug. As they settled at the table, Sophie couldn't contain her excitement. "Grandma, I started a gratitude journal today. Want to see my first entry?" "I'd love to, sweetheart, if you're okay sharing it with me," Grandma replied, her eyes twinkling. Sophie raced upstairs and returned with her journal. Handing it to Grandma, she watched nervously as her grandma read it. "Oh, Sophie, this is beautiful," Grandma said warmly. "You have such a big heart." Sophie's cheeks turned pink. "Thanks, Grandma. Writing in my journal makes me realize how lucky I am." Grandma nodded thoughtfully. "That's wonderful, my dear. But remember, gratitude isn't just about words, it's also about actions. Showing gratitude can be even more powerful." Sophie's eyes lit up with curiosity. "How do I do that?" Grandma smiled. "By doing things that make others happy, you'll show them how much you appreciate them." After dinner, Sophie decided to put Grandma's advice into action. She noticed her mom looking tired after cooking their meal. "Mom, dinner was amazing," Sophie said sincerely. "Can I help clean up?" Her mum's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but she smiled. "That'd be lovely, Sophie." Liam, inspired by Sophie's gesture, joined in too. Together, they cleared the table and washed the dishes, turning the chore into a fun family activity. Later, Sophie noticed Max struggling to reach his favorite toy because of his injured paw. She gently brought it to him, then gathered a few more of his beloved toys and laid them in front of him. Max's wagging tail and joyful bark warmed her heart. Finally, Sophie saw the apple pie her mom had baked earlier. One slice was noticeably larger than the rest. Initially tempted to claim it for herself, she thought of Liam and how much he loved pie. Smiling, she added a generous dollop of whipped cream to the largest piece and handed it to him. "Wow, thanks, Sophie," Liam said, genuinely surprised. Grandma watched all of this with a knowing smile. "You're showing gratitude beautifully, Sophie," she said, taking Sophie's hand. "Actions really do speak louder than words." Sophie's eyes sparkled as she bit into the pie. She realized that expressing gratitude wasn't just about writing it down. It was about making others feel appreciated and loved. And in that moment, Sophie's heart felt fuller than ever. "Oscar, come here, please," his grandma called. "The people are waiting for their soup." Looking up from his task, Oscar clucked his tongue. "Coming, Gamma!" It was a chilly Saturday morning. Oscar and Gamma were at the town park for a special event. A local charity had organized a fun day for senior citizens, and Oscar was helping his grandma at the food station. Gamma had even made her famous vegetable soup for the occasion. As soon as Oscar flipped the open sign, a crowd gathered. Gamma poured steaming soup into bowls while Oscar handed them out. The soup was so popular that they ran out in less than an hour. Finally, Oscar sat down with the last bowl of soup, ready to enjoy it. Just as he lifted the spoon to his lips, a soft voice interrupted him. "Excuse me?" Oscar looked up to see an elderly lady standing nearby. She looked frail, her hands trembling as she pointed toward the soup. "Is there any soup left?" she asked. Oscar glanced at his bowl, then back at the empty pot on the stall. There was only one choice, and it wasn't easy. "Please have a seat," Oscar said, helping her to a bench. "I'll bring you some soup." He placed the bowl in front of her with a smile. "Enjoy." The lady's eyes lit up as she said, "Thank you, child. Your kindness means the world to me." Oscar blushed and returned to the stall. Despite giving up his soup, he felt warm inside. It was the kind of happiness that came from helping someone. The next day at school, Oscar's kindness streak continued. It was recess, and the playground buzzed with activity. As Oscar played, he noticed Mrs. Johnson struggling to carry a tall stack of books. "Please don't fall, please don't fall," she muttered. Oscar dashed to her side. "Let me help you, Mrs. Johnson." Before she could reply, he grabbed the top few books. Seeing him, other kids joined in to help. Together, they carried the books to her desk. Mrs. Johnson's gratitude was evident, and Oscar felt like a knight completing a noble quest. Later that day, an idea struck Oscar. He decided to surprise his friends with small gifts. Using his saved-up allowance, he bought a shiny marble for Alex, a sparkly sticker for Lily, and a bouncy ball for Max. When he gave them the gifts, his friends were delighted. Inspired by Oscar, they started their own acts of kindness. Alex shared his favorite blue crayon, Lily offered her cookies, and Max entertained everyone with jokes. Oscar's small gesture had sparked a chain reaction of sharing. That weekend, Gamma came over for dinner. Oscar proudly recounted his week of good deeds. His eyes then fell on a box of old toys in the corner. "Gamma, Sophie, what if we donate some toys to kids who don't have as many?" Oscar suggested. "I love that idea," Sophie exclaimed. "We could ask our neighbors to join in too." Excited by their plan, they went door to door, sharing their mission. Mr. Jenkins donated a colourful puzzle, Mrs. Thompson contributed a soft teddy bear, and the neighbourhood kids pitched in their favourite toys. The response was overwhelming. On the day of the toy drive, the park was alive with excitement. As Oscar prepared to donate his toys, he hesitated. Among them were his most cherished ones, a toy car, a stuffed dinosaur, and his favourite action figure. Sophie noticed his reluctance and said, "I know it's hard, Oscar. I felt the same way about donating Mr. Snuggles." Oscar's jaw dropped. "You gave away Mr. Snuggles. You never go to bed without him." "I did," Sophie said with a smile. "It was tough, but when I saw how happy it made the little girl who got him, it felt worth it." Inspired by Sophie's words, Oscar gathered his favourite toys and placed them in the donation box. To his surprise, instead of feeling sad, he felt proud. As kids lined up to receive the toys, their faces lit up with joy. Watching their happiness, Oscar realised that sharing wasn't about the objects themselves, but the smiles they brought. Walking home that evening, Oscar felt lighter. He might miss his toys, but knowing they had brought joy to others filled his heart with warmth. In that moment, he knew the true power of kindness. "Ooh, that's so pretty, yay." Sophie and her mum were in the garden, planting the new flowers they had bought. Together, they dug holes for the flowers and carefully placed the plants into them. Careful, sweetheart, Mum guided Sophie as she placed a flower in the soil. Sophie felt like an artist. The garden was their beautiful painting. Yet there was something that made Sophie feel uneasy. Caterpillars. They were crawling and wiggly. She didn't like them one bit. Sophie watched as their little legs moved in rhythm. She wrinkled her nose and said, "I don't like caterpillars." Her mum smiled kindly. "You know, Sophie," she said, "caterpillars are just little creatures trying to find their way." She placed her hand under a leaf and a caterpillar climbed onto it. And you know, they don't stay caterpillars forever. They turn into beautiful butterflies. Sophie's eyes widened in curiosity. "Really?" "Yes, really," Mum replied, tapping her nose. "They look a little strange now, but they'll go on a magical journey. By the end of it, they'll become something amazing." Sophie tried to imagine it all. A caterpillar turning into a colourful butterfly. That made her feel a little better and less afraid of the tiny, creepy crawlies. "Caterpillars become butterflies," she whispered to herself. But then her mum added something else. "Some caterpillars, however, turn into moths." "What?" Sophie's eyes widened further. A shiver ran down her spine. She didn't like moths very much either. She tried to stay calm after that. She tried very hard. She moved away from where most of the caterpillars were and tried to finish up quickly. But then she saw a caterpillar climbing on her hand. Sophie dropped everything, shaking it off and running into the house screaming. Sophie stayed upset by it all. Even her brother Oscar noticed. "What's wrong, Sophie?" he asked. "I promise I didn't do anything this time." Sophie looked up from where she was having a tea party with a teddy bear. "I know you didn't." She took a deep breath and hugged the bear. "It's the caterpillars." "What caterpillars?" Oscar laughed. Sophie poked her tongue out but continued. "In the garden," she said. "I need to stop being afraid of caterpillars. What should I do?" Oscar thought for a moment and then had an idea. He went to the garden and returned with a tiny caterpillar on a leaf. Sitting next to Sophie, he said, "You can do this, Sophie." With a deep breath, Sophie reached out a finger. But just as her finger got close, the caterpillar wiggled away. "Ah!" Sophie screamed. She felt like crying. Okay, I'll put it back." Oscar quickly ran to the garden. Sophie, on the other hand, felt both scared and mad at herself. Oscar was back in no time. "You don't need to feel afraid anymore, Sophie." Sophie sniffled and looked up at Oscar. "I just don't want to be a scaredy cat." Oscar stayed silent for a second and then said, "You know, Sophie, being brave isn't about never feeling scared. You remember how scared I am of spiders, right?" Sophie nodded. "Well, Alex brought his pet spider to school yesterday. In front of the whole class, I screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw it." Sophie covered her mouth. For Oscar to have screamed in front of everyone was a huge deal. "But you know, by the end of the day, I faced my fear." "How?" Sophie asked. "Well, Alex loaned me his gloves. When I touched the spider wearing the gloves, I didn't feel as scared. I was brave enough to try touching the spider even though it scared me." Sophie wiped her tears and thought about what Oscar had said. She nodded, feeling a little better. Oscar perked up. "Hey, I have an idea." He found a pair of gloves and a hat. He helped Sophie put them on. "Now you have your superhero gear," he said with a wink. Sophie smiled and looked at the gloves. She felt stronger and ready to face her fear. With Oscar by her side and the gloves on her hands, Sophie went back to the garden. The caterpillars were still there, yet Sophie felt ready. She watered the flowers and pulled up weeds. She even looked at the caterpillars from a safe distance. Her heart raced, but she stayed strong. As the day went on, Sophie learned something important. It was okay to be afraid sometimes, but she shouldn't let her fear stop her from doing something. Sophie smiled as she whispered to herself, "If caterpillars can become butterflies, I can become brave."